Welcome to Stranger Than Friction, the podcast where we dive deep into history's most bizarre and unexplained mysteries.
All right, so we're diving into some seriously chilling stuff today, huh? The Dyatlov Pass Incident. This isn't just some ghost story, you know. People have been trying to crack this one for decades. 9 hikers got gone in the Ural Mountains back in '59. And the details, well, they're straight out of a nightmare, some of them.
It's the lack of a clear answer that gets you, I think. We know they died, and we know it was weird, but the why, that's a whole rabbit hole of theories.
And these weren't exactly amateurs, were they?
Nope, experienced hikers. They were going for their Category 3 certification, the highest level in the Soviet Union back then. Think of it. January, dead of winter, heading for a Torten mountain.
Tough stuff. And one of them actually turned back, right? Got sick.
That's right, Yuri Yudin. He ended up being the sole survivor. Can you imagine? Knowing you were the only one to walk away?
That would mess you up. But it also means he's the last one who saw them alive. Anything useful there?
Sadly, no. Whatever happened was after he left on the 31st of January.
So we've got 8 hikers left, a mountain that's nicknamed Dead Mountain, which already sounds ominous, and a whole lot of questions. Let's start with the basics. What do we actually know for sure?
Well, we know they set up camp on the slope of that mountain, Kolotsiak, on February 1st.
And that's where things get interesting or terrifying, depending how you look at it. Something made them cut their way out of their tent that night.
Into the freezing wilderness. These weren't exactly beginners. The Urals in winter, that's sub-zero temps, crazy winds, potential blizzards. You don't just casually wander out there.
Okay, so something spooked them badly, but what? The search party didn't find the abandoned tent until February 20th, so there's a big gap in our knowledge.
That's right. And what happened in between is a puzzle we're piecing together from bits of evidence and where the bodies were eventually found over weeks. It's like a morbid scavenger hunt, really.
And those bodies, the first 4, found close to the tent, hypothermia. Right, makes sense.
Initially, that's what they thought, exposure. But hold on, because months later, they find the other 4 bodies down in a ravine much further away.
Uh-oh. That doesn't sound good.
It wasn't. These weren't just frozen. They had injuries, crushed skulls, broken ribs, internal damage, but no marks on the skin to match. And get this. One woman was missing her tongue and eyes. Hypothermia doesn't do that.
Okay, now we're talking something else entirely. Not just the cold, but some kind of force.
Right. No animal attack, no tracks, and if it was another person, where are the footprints, the weapons?
So we've got experienced hikers running from something in terror, injuries that don't make sense, and then I gotta ask, is this where the whole radiation thing comes in?
Yes, the radiation. Found on some of their clothing. It adds to the whole what the heck happened vibe, doesn't it?
Big time. Does this mean we're going full conspiracy theory, some secret Cold War experiment gone wrong?
It's tempting, right? But hold your horses. The source of the radiation was never actually confirmed.
So it could have been just, what, from their gear? Wasn't stuff kind of radioactive back then?
Exactly. Lanterns, compasses. Sometimes they used radioactive materials, but the levels on the clothing were a bit higher than you'd expect, which keeps the door open for those Cold War theories, I suppose.
All right, so we've got a spooky scene here. Hikers running in a panic, brutal injuries, a dash of maybe radiation. It's practically begging for some explanations. What are the main theories that try to make sense of this mess?
Oh, there's a whole buffet of theories, ranging from the plausible to the did you really just say that kind.
Lay it on me. I love a good mystery. Avalanche. Animal attack. Give me the highlights.
The avalanche theory, that's usually the first one people jump to. They were on a mountain, it's winter. But if you look at the terrain, it doesn't really fit for a big avalanche.
Plus, you mentioned the injuries didn't match up.
Right, avalanches crush and suffocate, not do that. So what about an animal attack?
Yeah, I was thinking that. Wolves, maybe? But no tracks, you said.
Exactly. And those specific injuries, not your typical animal attack. So we've ruled out 2 of the easy ones, but there's more.
Hit me.
All right, there's the infrasound theory. Ever heard of that one?
Vaguely. Isn't that like, sound too low for us to hear, but it can mess with you?
You got it? The idea is that the wind and the shape of the mountains created a pocket of intense infrasound.
And that could
cause all sorts of weirdness, unease, anxiety, even hallucinations. Some folks think it drove them to panic, made them flee the tent, and ultimately led to their deaths.
I mean, cutting open the tent instead of using the zipper. That's not exactly rational behavior.
Right, but here's the catch. There's no proof that infrasound was actually happening at the time. It's a theory that's hard to prove or disprove.
Okay, so it's on the table, but we're not putting all our eggs in that basket. What about some of the more out there ideas. I know this case attracts those.
Oh, you have no idea. Yetis, UFOs, government mind control experiments, you name it, someone's probably written a blog post about it.
All right, well, I'll file those under fun, but probably not true. Any other theories that are at least a little bit grounded in reality?
Well, there's one that's gained some traction lately, and it might be the most convincing so far. Katabatic winds.
Katabatic winds. Okay, that sounds intense. What are we talking about here?
Picture it. Powerful winds rushing down the slopes of mountains, driven by gravity, unpredictable, super strong gusts. The Urals are prime territory for these.
And you think that hit the tent, like blew it over or something?
Potentially even ripped it apart. Imagine you're inside and bam! This insane wind slams into you. You might panic, run without thinking.
Explains the no clothes thing, maybe, if they were just grabbing whatever they could. But wouldn't such a powerful wind leave a mark? Like evidence that it happened?
You'd think, right. But katabatic winds can be really localized. Quick bursts of crazy, it could have hit them hard, then calmed down, leaving little trace.
Okay. That was actually pretty convincing. But like all the others, still just a theory.
Exactly. And that's the frustrating beauty of this case. Evidence everywhere, but it's like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing, and the picture on the box is just smudged.
Perfect metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
But, we've talked about the what, the evidence, the possible whys. But there's another big question here, isn't there? Why are we so obsessed with this? Why does this case grip people after all these years?
It's the question, isn't it? I think it gets at something very human. We need to understand things. Even when they're terrifying, we want to find meaning in chaos.
Right. Our brains hate loose ends. We want the story to make sense, have a beginning, middle, end. And the Dyatlov Pass, it just ends. No explanation.
It's a story with a missing last chapter, a puzzle with no solution. That incompleteness bugs us, keeps us coming back, even when we know there might not be an answer.
It's like a splinter in your mind.
Yeah.
Like you said, you need to know why.
And that's the power of a good mystery, isn't it? It forces us to admit we don't know everything. There are things out there we may never grasp.
Well, that's comforting.
But think about it. It also shows how much we crave knowledge to make sense of the world around us, even the scary parts.
Okay, so we've got a case that's strange, tragic, probably unsolved forever. But why is it so hard to figure out? Just because it was so long ago? Or is there something more to it?
Time definitely doesn't help. Back in '59, forensics wasn't what it is today. Imagine a modern CSI team on this. DNA analysis, fancy reconstructions.
Yeah, back then they were working with basically magnifying glasses and intuition. Plus, let's be real, it was the Cold War. The Soviets weren't exactly known for transparency.
Information control was their specialty. So yeah, there's a real chance that some evidence was, shall we say, misplaced or even destroyed on purpose.
It's like the puzzle pieces were not just missing, but someone deliberately took them out of the box.
Adds a whole layer of difficulty, that's for sure. And even when they reopened the case in 2019, too much time had passed. Witnesses gone, memories faded, evidence. Well, it doesn't get better with age.
So are we basically stuck more questions than answers? And that's as good as it gets.
I wouldn't say stuck. We might never be 100% sure, but we can still learn a lot by going over what we do have. It's like detective work. You rule things out, weigh the possibilities, look for those tiny details that maybe everyone else missed.
The devil's in the details, as they say. And that's part of the fun, right? The challenge, like a mental workout.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe with new ways of looking at things, with modern knowledge, we'll spot something that was overlooked back then.
So in this first part of our deep dive, we've set the scene, gone over the main evidence, tried to wrap our heads around the theories. But this is really just the start. There's so much more to uncover.
Absolutely. We need to dig into the hikers themselves, their lives, personalities, relationships. Maybe there are clues hidden in who they were, not just what happened to them.
Now that's an interesting angle. So if you're ready to go even deeper into this chilling mystery, join us for part 2 of our Dyatlov Pass deep dive, where things are about to get personal.
Welcome back to the Dyatlov Pass, where things, as always, are more complicated than they seem. You know, one thing that strikes me about this case is, it's like every answer just leads to more questions.
Like peeling an onion, huh? You get through one layer and there's another one underneath, just waiting.
Exactly. And speaking of layers, we've talked about the big picture stuff, but there are all these little details, these loose threads that just make it creepier, you know?
Oh, totally. And I bet our listeners are thinking the same thing I am. What about the hikers' journals?
Yeah.
They kept those, right? And cameras, too. There's got to be some clue in there, right? Like a final entry that says, hey, I think I hear something out there.
Wouldn't that be nice? Sadly, it's not that simple. The journals are mostly about the everyday stuff. The weather, the terrain, their struggles. It's fascinating historically to see it through their eyes, but nothing that jumps out as, this is why they freaked out.
So, no smoking gun in their own words.
Hmm.
What about the photos? Any weird shadows or, glowing orbs in the background?
Not that we found. But the photos are kind of sad, actually. They're just happy. The group laughing, skiing, setting up camp. It reminds you these were real people, not just a mystery.
Yeah, that gets to me too. Seeing their faces. It makes it all the more tragic, doesn't it? But okay, so no visual clues either. What about that radiation thing? Any new ideas on where that came from?
It's still a puzzle. Like we said, most likely it was from their gear. Old school compasses and lanterns, some of them used radioactive materials.
Right, back when a little glow in the dark was considered perfectly normal.
Exactly. And here's the thing, the levels on their clothes were higher than you'd expect just from that. Which, of course, keeps those Cold War conspiracy folks happy. Was there something else going on out there that we don't know about? Who knows?
It's hard to let go of that idea entirely, isn't it? Especially with how secretive the Soviets were. But okay, let's put that aside for a second and talk about the injuries. They're still the most baffling part of this whole thing.
Absolutely. The hypothermia, okay, we get that. It was freezing. But the blunt force trauma, the internal injuries, that's not from cold weather.
Like they got hit by something invisible. I've seen theories about rock slides, landslides, but you said there wasn't evidence for those.
Not on the scale needed to cause those injuries. A landslide big enough to do that, you'd see the mess it made. Plus, the specific injuries, like the missing tongue and eyes, that's just unusual.
And super creepy, let's be honest.
Yeah.
It's tempting to go down the ritualistic killing rabbit hole, but...
Let's stick to what we can actually back up with evidence, shall we? So, back to those injuries. We talked about infrasound messing with their minds, but could it have hurt them physically too?
Ooh, good question. Could it?
It's possible. Intense infrasound can do some damage. Nausea, disorientation, even internal injuries. There's been talk about it as a potential weapon, but that's all hush-hush stuff.
But so the hikers stumble onto some top-secret sonic weapon test. Okay, now we're really in spy movie territory.
Fun to think about, but again, zero proof. And with the Cold War, we'll probably never know for sure. But even if we ditch the sonic weapon idea, we're still left with, how did they get those injuries?
Hey, what else could have done it?
Remember that paradoxical undressing thing? That can happen with severe hypothermia. Basically, your brain gets so messed up from the cold, it thinks you're overheating, so you start taking off clothes.
Oh, yeah, I remember you mentioning that. It's terrifying. But that explains the lack of clothes, not the injuries themselves.
Right.
Taking off your clothes won't give you a fractured skull. We're back to square one.
Pretty much, and it keeps leading us back to the environment. What was going on out there that could have done this?
We ruled out a big avalanche, but could it have been a smaller one? Like a chunk of snow breaking off?
Possibly. A smaller snow slab wouldn't necessarily leave a huge mess, but it could still pack a punch, and depending on how it hit them, it could explain some of the injuries.
But you'd think there'd be some sign of that, right?
Not always. The area was rough, covered in snow. Evidence could get buried or eroded easily, especially with the weather they were dealing with. Plus, back then, the searchers weren't looking for signs of a mini avalanche. They were just trying to find the missing people.
Good point. It's easy to forget how different things were 60 years ago. Maybe they just missed some crucial clue.
It's very possible. And that's why this case keeps haunting us, all these puzzle pieces, but they just don't fit together neatly.
Like trying to see a clear picture through a fogged-up window. You can almost make it out, but not quite. But even blurry pictures can give you clues, right?
Exactly. That's what keeps us coming back to this. It's a challenge to our brains, to science. It's a reminder that even with all our fancy technology, some mysteries are still too tough to crack.
And that's kind of cool, isn't it? Admitting we don't know everything makes the world a little more interesting.
I think so. But where do we go from here? We've talked about the evidence, the theories, the limitations of the investigation. What else is there to learn from all this?
Right. We've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything we've missed?
There's one thing we haven't talked about much, and it might be the key to understanding this whole thing better. We keep talking about the hikers as a group, but what about them? As individuals, their lives, their personalities, how they interacted?
Ooh, you're right. We've been so focused on the what and the how that we forgot about the who. These weren't just victims, they were people. Maybe if we get to know them better, the events will make more sense.
That's the idea. So join us as we shift gears from the physical evidence to the human side of this case.
All right, final part of our Dyatlov Pass deep dive. And this time, we're doing things a little differently. We've obsessed over the evidence, the theories, the whole frozen mountain thing. But what about the hikers themselves? We haven't really talked about.
It's easy to get lost in the mystery, to forget these were 9 real people, each with their own hopes and dreams and reasons for being on that mountain. Maybe if we understand them better, some of what happened might make more sense.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So let's meet these folks. We know they were experienced, going for that top-level certification. But tell me, what were they like as people?
Well, we've got Igor Dyatlov, the group's leader, 23 years old, studying radio engineering, loved the outdoors. He planned the whole expedition meticulously. Challenging, but something they could handle. Or so he thought.
So, the classic leader type. Organized, driven, maybe a bit of a risk taker. Could that have played a role, you think? In what happened, I mean?
It's hard to say for sure, but some folks think his ambition, that push for the Category 3, might have made him, I don't know, maybe more willing to take chances out there.
Yeah, you get focused on a goal. Sometimes you miss the warning signs. Like, who else was in the group? Anyone else stand out?
We've got Zenaida Kolmogorova, 22, always cheerful, apparently.
Yeah.
A real athlete, strong, resilient, the type you'd want on your side in a tough spot.
And she ended up in the worst tough spot imaginable. It's just awful. Anyone else?
Ludmila Dubinina. She was 20, an engineering student who loved photography. A lot of the pictures we have from the trip are hers.
Wow. The one documenting everything, capturing the beauty, and then that's all that's left. What about the others?
Well, there's Rustam Slobodin, 23, super smart, kind of sarcastic, the brains of the group. And Yuri Krivonishenko, 24, he was an engineer too, but also a musician. He brought his mandolin on the trip.
Oh, that's kind of sweet. I can picture them around the campfire playing music. Hey, it's hard to square that with how it all ended. Who else?
Nicolas Thibault Brignol, 23, bit of a firebrand, really into politics, born in France but raised in the Soviet Union. Interesting mix, right?
Yeah, definitely. You wonder if any of their personal beliefs or maybe disagreements played a role? I mean, stress can do weird things to people.
For sure. But we have no evidence that any arguments or anything led to what happened.
Okay, fair enough. Who are we missing?
Alexander Kolovatov, 24, a physicist, quiet guy apparently, but brilliant. And then there's Georgy Doroshenko, 21, loved a good joke. The class clown type.
Ah, the one trying to keep everyone's spirits up, and even he couldn't, I don't know, outjoke whatever they encountered, I guess. Last one.
Semyon Zolotaryov. He was 38, the oldest of the bunch. War veteran, actually. And an instructor at the Institute, so he definitely brought some authority to the group.
A war veteran. That's, wow. You got to wonder what he was thinking during all this, what his instincts were telling him.
Right. You've got these young hikers, and then you've got Zolotaryov, who'd seen real darkness, understood how fragile life is.
And yet, it got them all. Nature doesn't care who you are, does it?
Nope. Beautiful, but brutal. No favorites.
That's a good point, and I think it leads back to what we keep bumping up against with this case. We might never fully understand what happened. We can analyze, theorize, but there are forces out there that just defy explanation, maybe.
That's a tough one to swallow, but I think you're right. Sometimes there are no easy answers, no matter how much we want them.
Maybe that's why this story sticks with us. Not just the creepiness, but because it reminds us we don't know everything.
Exactly, and maybe that's okay. The mystery is part of what makes it fascinating.
I like that. It's not about having the solution, it's about the search itself.
Well said.
So here we are, end of our Dyatlov Pass deep dive. We've looked at the evidence, tried to make sense of the theories, even met the hikers, and we're still left with more questions than answers.
We might never know for sure what happened on that mountain, but hopefully we've all learned a little something along the way. About the fragility of life, the power of nature, and the enduring allure of a good mystery.
And hey, maybe that's enough. The journey is sometimes more important than the destination, right? Thanks for joining us as we explored one of history's most baffling events. Until next time, keep those curious minds working, and remember, sometimes the best mysteries are the ones that stay unsolved.